Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're gonna let people come through the virtual doors and joining this webinar today. It's really great to see all the names coming through. If anyone wants to share, I would love to hear where people are tuning in from. I personally am in Boston, Mass, just the northeast corridor of the US. Where is everyone else coming from? Love it. I see Adrian from Brazil, Laura from Argentina, Stan from Chicago, London, Texas, South Africa, Atlanta. Look at this worldly audience. The Netherlands. Dorado from South Africa. Hello, welcome. Sarah from Washington, DC. Marta from Nottingham, England. Casey from Dallas. A beer from Dubai. Kim from Toronto. So exciting. Welcome, Allison from Amsterdam. Shona from Belfast. Great. Let's get started. So again, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Susan Trin from the Poppulo marketing team. Thank you for tuning into our webinar, A Year in Review, looking back on 2023's communication trends, of which we can take our learnings into the new year. A quick housekeeping note, we are currently on the Zoom platform, and you can use the chat function on the console to enter your questions and comments. We really encourage you to interact with our speaker and each other, especially at the end when we want to know what's on your mind in terms of communication topics to explore in 2024. And yes, we will send out a recording to all attendees after the webinar. So before we dive in, essentially the 2023 highlight reel of the internal comms landscape, let me tell you a little bit about our host, Poppulo. Poppulo is the leading communications and workplace experience software company. At Poppulo, we connect the people you need to reach with the right message across multiple channels like email, digital signage, mobile, internet, and more, all from a single platform. Our platform sets the standard on how technology can connect people, systems, and ways of working to deepen relationships and help organizations move forward. Today, we serve over 4,500 customers across 80 countries, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, with enterprise-grade solutions that help the employee and customer experience, optimize workplace management, improve operations, and drive measurable impact. Now, on to our featured speaker, Andrew Hubbard, Director of Internal Communications and Engagement at Poppulo. Welcome, Andrew, and over to you.
Thank you, Suze. Hi, everyone. I was blown away there just to see the global reach of today's webinar. And I feel like a bit of a fraud, right? Because I'm actually going to be sharing a lot of content that we talked about throughout our webinars over the years. So although I'm hosting it today, credit goes to all of our other hosts and speakers that we've had this year. Thank you all so much for joining in. So who am I? Andrew Hubbard, Internal Communications Lead here at Poppulo. I joined here in 2022 with a really cool kind of meta challenge of doing internal communications for a communications company. Before that, I was a customer. I was a customer for more than a decade, actually. So it's nice to be on this side of the fence. It's lovely to work with the talented folk who have built such amazing products that have helped me communicate over the years. And I'll start with a cliche of just a very British cliche. I know I've got an international audience, but normally around this time of year, we always say, where's the year gone, right? Festive lights are out again. It's the end of the year. And today is a really good opportunity for us to kind of stop, take stock, look at the trends that we've seen throughout the year, look at the challenges we faced, and really, as the title of the session suggests, just reflecting on some of those key topics. So what are they? What's our agenda? We're going to start by looking at what we thought would be the trends of 2023. Then we're going to talk about our partnership between HR and change, looking at the challenges that HR teams face and how communications can partner with them to solve those issues. The age-old challenge of reaching the hard-to-reach, the deskless worker. That seems to be a challenge that's been around all my career. So I look forward to talking through that one with you guys. A piece around leadership comms, where we see it fail, what we need to do to help leaders implement effective strategies. Then a piece there on AI. I don't know if you've heard of it. AI for internal communications. And then finally, we'll look at our own Poppulo maturity model. Now, on each of these slides, as I go through them, you'll see a QR code. And again, we will share the deck after with all of our registrants, but feel free to snap those while they're on the page. There's further reading on each of these topics. I'm going to obviously give a high-level overview on each of those sessions today. Final piece from me before we dive in is to talk to you about our chat. Use the chat, please. Everyone's done it already. I know you know how to use it now, but if you've got questions or thoughts or any wisdom you want to share on any of these topics, please do that. It's great for our other registrants and the audience today, but also I'm happy to try and take as many questions as we can and really turn this into a bit of a conversation. Although I can't see you, I know you're there because I'm looking at this screen over here with all the registrants on it. We'll wrap up, by the way, looking at 2024. What do we think the trends are going to be? I'm not going to sit here like some kind of psychic and guesstimate what they might be, but I'd love to hear from you guys what's going to be hitting your priority list for 2024. And then we'll also, at the end of the session, ask you what you want to see us cover in our webinars for next year as well. So, shall we get into it? First topic that we covered in January was, as I say, so I'm just trying to change slides now. Here we go. Let's try again. Hey-oh, there we go. 2023 communication trends. So there were three key trends that came out when we were presenting this topic: recognition as a tool for tackling burnout, artificial intelligence for productivity, and creating a culture in a hybrid environment. So a couple of stats to kind of bring this stuff to life for you. So on that first point around using recognition as a tool to tackle burnout, there was a 2022-23 AFLAC Workforces report that came out that said that more than half of US workers, so 59%, are experiencing at least moderate levels of burnout. That leaves a huge opportunity for organizations to ramp up communications around these non-operational topics, right? To make employee well-being a priority and to work to combat the effects of burnout. The report also acknowledged that acknowledging that work can be difficult and lead to burnout, and recognizing colleagues for a job well done can help the workforce become more willing to take care of their own mental health, become more proactive in that space, avoid stress and remain productive. So lots of interesting points there. Certainly using recognition as a tool is something we've been looking at here at Poppulo over the past year. We've introduced a new peer-to-peer colleague recognition scheme, and it's got a lot of uptake. And rereading this, actually, it makes me want to think about how I can link it more to well-being and our employee assistance program as well. Artificial intelligence, we are going to be talking about this later, but this was an important point in our January communications trends webinar, where we looked at this might, it's not going to be a brand new trend, right, for 2023, but I don't think any of us quite expected it to become so dominating. ChatGPT's launch in, I think it was April. Facebook, and this is a well-known stat, Facebook took around 10 months to get to a billion users. I think it took ChatGPT 5 days. It's absolutely dominating the conversation in a lot of the boardrooms around our customers. And we are looking at how we can use it ourselves. I'll talk more about Poppulo AI and how I'm using that as a customer a bit later on. Final point then was around that hybrid culture. How are organizations finding the balance between offering flexibility for colleagues, which, let's be honest, everyone's got very, very used to since 2020, but also getting collaboration, using the office spaces, which, again, let's be honest, are hugely expensive, right? It's a big challenge for people. So we did talk a lot around that, and I think some of the outcomes in the webinar were around, really knowing the audience, right? What do they need to be successful? And it's probably not a mandated number of days in the office. What data points do we have? What insights do we have to refine how we communicate with them, how we bring them into the office, how we start to build that culture? A conference I was at in, I want to say November 2022, there was a speaker who was talking about Wednesday +1, which I loved as a concept. And he said, a lot of his clients were using this idea of one mandated day in the office. That's the day where you'd have your all company meetings, and then plus another day. And the plus day was really interesting, because that's where you kind of say, well, when's the right time for me and my team to go in, and that seemed to be working quite well. But the point he was actually making was, nobody's getting it right at the moment. We're all trying things to see how it sticks. And that's why when companies like Zoom publicize that, there is a mandated ask to come back in the office a certain number of days a week, everyone goes, wow, that's crazy. And it probably won't be crazy after long. It'll be the norm for everyone. But while we're still finding our feet and working to create that culture in a hybrid environment, it's going to be a talking point. I think the final point I'll talk about on this, and again, you can see the QR code here on the screen if you haven't scanned it already. The point around when it comes to mandated days in the office, and again, this is at a conference I was at recently. We talked about the biggest blocker to collaboration is the tech challenge. So having people on a screen versus people in the room, and actually people in the room being able to read cues and having more of a say, whereas people on the screen have to get kind of brought into the conversation rather than being able to interject. So there's some ways to go, I think. I've just seen a couple of comments come through. Dale Smith has said that they conducted a qualitative survey let's run away from me because everyone's commented. Here we go. A qualitative survey, then held employee focus groups to do deep dives on this, and we learned so much. So valuable. I'm sorry, I missed what recognition as a tool for tackling burnout. Recognition is in kudos for employees. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we were talking about there, Kimberly. Giving kudos to colleagues, and creating a space for recognizing that colleagues are working hard was a topic that we talked about back in January. Good stuff. Keep the comments coming, everyone. I shall keep us moving because there are lots of topics to cover in a finite amount of time. Another area of another data point we used for the challenges entering 2023, so still looking at trends here, was Gallagher's State of the Sector report. When that was published, you can see, I won't read all of the data in front of you here, but I think there's some very consistent challenges being raised in these reports, right? Lack of time and capacity, disengaged employees, lack of analytics and measurement, and then tech not fit for purpose. Really interesting to see those trends coming through. Not sure if that's consistent for everyone here, but do let us know in the chat if those were issues that you experienced. Time for a quick poll. I can see Del and others are commenting, so let's get everyone, while you're feeling collaborative, to join in on our first poll here. And listen, it's always tricky to get the crystal ball out at the beginning of a year. That's why I'm not going to do it later. But I want to know from you guys, what were your top comms trends for 2023? What do you view as the trends? Artificial intelligence, change and transformation, leadership comms, reaching disconnected workers, creating a hybrid culture, tackling burnout. Those are just some, right? But feel free just to click on those. I can't vote because I'm a host or a panelist. But if I was voting, it would be change and transformation. It's been a very busy year on that front for us. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see the results, but maybe you guys can. That's disappeared now. Oh, there we go. I can see the results now. Yes, change and transformation. Hey, we're all in the same boat. I love it. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you taking part in that. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, let's keep us moving. Okay, in March, we were talking about the partnership between human resources or people and culture or people operations, whatever you call your HR function these days, but the partnership between them and those helping to deliver the change, specifically change transformation communications experts. Really interesting study actually that came out from Zoom, which said that the colleague expectations had changed so significantly after the pandemic that around 3/4, 75% of employees wanted much more flexibility. And I touched on this earlier, it's no surprise, right? But it's a huge number of the workforce. Another challenge that we talked about was retention, keeping hold of good people. The fact that flexibility increased for everyone meant that the talent pool globally just shifted. You didn't need to hire within a half an hour commute of an office anymore. It meant you can hire someone on the other side of the planet, potentially for cheaper, right? The market just completely opened up. And actually, from an employer value proposition perspective, a lot of people were taking roles in orgs that they just never would have had the chance to do so before. Economic uncertainty, it's been another year of macro shifts. It's been a very difficult year in some spaces in terms of cost of living, inflation, unemployment, and obviously this is a massive challenge when it comes to HR and change. And then a fourth area was the change in corporate culture. Building a culture in a hybrid and remote work environment we talked about, so I won't repeat that. So we spent the first part of that webinar talking about those challenges. So what are the top 4 challenges? But then, of course, we pivoted to how can we work together to create solutions? And the top tips that we came up with on that session, firstly, were to engage internal comms when you define a problem as early as possible. So using internal communications as a strategic partner, right? Not just delivering a kind of mandate to deliver noise into the organization. Use internal communicators as partners. Now, I'm preaching to the converted here, I know, but it was a very interesting conversation because it was with a chief HR officer, our own chief HR officer, actually. The second point was around knowing your audience, recognizing that things have changed over the past couple of years. They will continue to change too. Solutions exist in a moment. They won't necessarily be fit for purpose in a different org or different audience or even at a different time. So really making sure that you know the audience. And I can see Dell again is talking in the chat here. Everything that you're talking about, Dell, sprang up from your research. Knowing your audience better than anyone else, which is fantastic to see. Change is uncomfortable, right? So embracing vulnerability was another piece we talked about. It's okay, and this is something we've been working on here, it's okay for leaders not to have all the answers right away, as long as there's the will and the drive there to get those answers and deliver. I think that builds a lot of trust. And then measurement, right? Before, during, and after change. I think before, we need to look at what our delta is. What are we working to move? What dial are we trying to shift? Where are we wanting to move from and to? During, how effective are the comms? Are we reaching people? Are people getting the messages? And then after, what outcomes have we achieved? And then a final point, I would say this: embrace technology, right? It's all around us now. Whether it's AI, whether it's new tools coming on the market, whatever helps you to drive that change, absolutely should be embraced as well. Again, another download guide there on the QR code. We will say, if you haven't had a chance to scan that yet, we will be sharing that afterwards. Strategies for reaching the disconnected workforce. I mentioned in the intro there that this is an age-old problem, right? This is something that seems to have been around forever. And I think there's some interesting stats actually on this. Let me talk about the stats first. So I think, without kind of reading the slide to you, there's 3 different data points there. And essentially what we're seeing is there's lots of these workers, right? They are not highly engaged, and many don't feel they're getting adequate communications from their company. Massive numbers there. And again, the data points are at the bottom. But how do we, what are our strategies? That's what we looked at. What are our strategies from moving from where we are to really engaging these colleagues? And there's been some great work done this year, actually. I'd highly recommend Jenny Field's recent study, Remotely Interested, if you haven't seen it yet. That talks on this topic, and it's based on some really interesting data. But here's what we discussed for our session. 3 steps for engaging those workers. The first one is establishing a really strong listening strategy, not just surveys, right? But let's start with the surveys because they are important. They haven't died off yet. I had a conversation yesterday from a stakeholder who got in touch with me and was asking for surveys. You know, you can see that it seems to still be a very effective method for kind of finding the delta now and where we want to be. Anyway, surveys, customizing employee engagement surveys, using the tools available in the market now to do things that are always on or a moment in time, whether that's onboarding or offboarding or, you know, key moments around talent management process cycles, whatever it might be. And then looking at sample sizes as well, you know, and that goes back to the point that we've been talking about here around knowing your audience, right? Knowing the subject matter. So surveys are one part of it, but actually when it comes to the listening strategy, the focus groups, so the qualitative stuff, around, you know, built around reliable audience profiles, I think delivers a hell of a lot more. And what we talked about in this webinar is what best practice looks like, you know, aiming for a room filled with quality participants, but not too many of them, 10 to 12 people, allowing everyone to have a safe space to talk and time to do it. So not having their people managers in the room, or indeed any people managers in the room. And then a third point was kind of an ongoing feedback loop. So how can we, away from a kind of a survey cycle or focus group cycle, allow a continuous loop of feedback, pulse surveys, kiosks, digital suggestion boxes, whatever it might be, hugely important. I can see there's some comments there that have been addressed already, so thank you for whoever answered that, but we will be sharing the slides, so you'll get all the QR codes and everything else and all the data points and all the great reports after as well. Second point then on engaging deskless workers, develop a personalized approach. Personalization is really important, right? So in the opening slide to this section, we talked about the fact that people don't feel like they're getting content that's relevant to them. So using what you've learned in that colleague listening approach to define audience segments and crafting personas and crafting content delivered to those colleagues on where they're based is so important. And that really links to the third point in this session, which is around leveraging multiple channels. So I always talk about this as meeting people where they eat. There's a really great story about an old chief executive who worked at a British company called Network Rail. And he was a sir, so he was a very kind of he was up there in terms of the kind of scale of elitism, but you wouldn't have told it. You know, everyone knew him as John. And he had his lunch every single day in the cafeteria where everyone else had their lunch. So this is a very literal example of meeting people where they eat. But he had his finger on the pulse of that organization because, you know, he didn't eat his food in his office. He didn't go out to eat lunch with, you know, other lords and sirs and baronesses. He made a point of meeting people where they were. And so when I talk about leveraging multiple channels, I'm not just obviously talking about email, mobile, signage, collaboration tools like Slack and SharePoint. I'm also talking about town halls. I'm talking about those informal moments where we can create a space for leaders to really get under the skin of the organization. So look, hugely interesting space. Again, there's a Breaking Barriers report there, strategies to engage hard to reach employees, and there's so many good resources out there now. Question here, Kathy says, what do we mean by deskless? Assume it's remote distributed colleagues. The challenge is trying to engage the workforce that includes hybrid distributed and office based. I think you're right, Kathy, actually, and my approach to it pre-pandemic was when I said deskless workers, I basically meant shop floor. People who were, you know, in manufacturing environments or working on a shop floor, people who weren't like me, sat in a desk all the time, sat in front of a desk all the time, connected, being able to open email as it came through. So I think, I think now, post-pandemic, we're in a space where yes, that group of people are still in the deskless worker, right, the hard to reach space. But for me, hard to reach is also people who don't want to engage with your channels. Like I've worked in organizations where just as many hard to reach colleagues, disconnected workers in manufacturing environments just as many office-based workers are not connecting with communications for various reasons. So I think we need to look at it as, when we talk about hard to reach, we need to think about, engagement across all content, getting people's hearts and minds, and eyes and ears on content. Good. Okay, that's fine. I just saw a comment there as well. No, that's fine. Okay, let's move on then, because time is ticking on. Why and how leaders must get comms right. Now, again, we're preaching to the converted here, right? Everyone here knows why it's so important that leadership succeeds when it comes to communication, ever more so, I think. And I do think we've made huge strides as a profession. I think we are, we're getting seats at the table now. Our voice is being heard, and I think there is a healthy respect for the kind of improvements we can drive as a community. But what does bad look like? I feel tremendously sorry for this stock photography model here, because we've used her in a slide that says leadership fails. I'm sure she is a fantastic leader. But there were a number of topics that we covered in this August webinar. So the why and how behind leadership comms, and the fails around lack of empathy. We're talking about basically leaders who don't understand how employees are feeling, and then don't understand, and then fail to make the time, use the data available to them to really get under the skin of what people are thinking and feeling. The second one is, I'm laughing because my dog's just jumped on my back and you can't see it. Sorry, everyone. There we go. The second point there, understanding that the medium is the message, right? The channel that is used to communicate also sends a message. Timing, company news needs to be communicated internally first. We're still seeing this not always happen. People finding out things from LinkedIn. A really good example here at Poppulo, actually. When I joined, I did a bit of a qualitative tour of all of our colleagues, really just trying to find out, what's working well, what's missing, are we practicing what we preach? And one of the topics that came up again and again and again was somebody would leave the organization and I'd find out on LinkedIn. And when I went to the leadership and said, why is this happening? It feels a bit cloak and dagger. What's going on here? It's not great for trust. They said, oh no, we didn't even know it happened. So there was no real reason that it stopped. And to this day, we launched a new channel, targeted audience-based newsletter, where one of the top read articles consistently is something that's called Starters, Movers, Leavers. We talk about our new joiners, we welcome them, anyone who's had a promotion or shifted teams, and anyone who's decided to move on from the organisation is celebrated and interviewed in that section. And it's the most popular every week. So, really working on making sure that our colleagues hear from us first. That's really important. No communication at all. Lack of communication obviously leads to distrust. Too much communication, and we've all seen this. That last quarter of the year, or that particular that tricky time just after summer. The summer break where no one said anything because everyone's off on holiday, and all of a sudden there's 20 campaigns all going on at once. And what's the result? People tune out. Right? They haven't got the time. They don't know what the priority is. So we just completely lose them. Inconsistency, in communication, leader A says this and leader B says something that completely contradicts it. There's an imbalance. It's just, it really isn't a great way to work. And then there's kind of this disconnect again, this robotic or jargon-based delivery of messages where people just don't understand, we're not taking people on the journey with us. Lack of context, and then not listening. We talked about the listening loop earlier and how important this is. If a leader stands in front of people and continuously ignores advice that they're getting from their own people, they won't build the trust, they won't get the respect they need, and feedback basically will stop coming in at that point. So that's all the failures, and I'll stress again, I'm sure this person here is a wonderful leader. We talked about how we can move away from that and create a leadership comms strategy that works. So the solutions are around understanding what matters, learn what people care about, right? What do leaders care about? What do they need to do in order to be successful in the organization? What are their priorities? What's keeping them up at night? knowing our people as well. So defining the culture, right, and learning what our colleagues want and need, and then assessing your leader, right? So what is their comm style? Are they jargon based because that's the education they had? Are they a natural communicator who can, really break things down and use lots of different examples and storytelling to bring people on a journey? Or actually, are they a listener? Are they an introvert? All of that stuff matters. Once you've got all of that information and those data points, you can start to create a plan, right? So considering the goals, the audience, what kind of content's going to work for them and the end user, and then how we plan on listening to colleagues, getting the feedback and continuously improving. And then the final piece was around bringing the strategy to life. So some of the ways to do that, we talked through town halls, fireside chats, digital platforms, blogs, vlogs, podcasts, videos posted to social platforms, internally and externally, ask me anything sessions, listening circles. The list is endless. So do keep that. Do share any thoughts on that, on those kind of delivery methods for leaders and what's worked and what hasn't. A couple of questions have come in. So before I move on to the next point, I'm just going to check over here. Michelle, the bullet points on leadership fails, is that an outcome of data and survey, or is some anecdotal? I'd love to know the stats and figures on this. So we've got, I think, we'll be sharing the slides after this. Michaela, sorry, I think I might have called you Michelle there. My apologies. So we'll be sharing that afterwards, and it should have any data points in there. But a lot of our webinars are fronted by experts as well. So some of this, I'm not sure on this one off the top of my head, and I don't seem to have it in my notes. But this may have come from a presenter just based on experiences of what they've seen works and what doesn't. But we have got something here from you, from a chap called David Meister. You can check this out on davidmeister.com. There's a link down the bottom left here as well, which takes you to a help your leadership team become better communicators report, which is really handy as well. But I'm not going to talk through this in great detail because a much brighter mind than mine has created it. But essentially, it looks at that formula that creates trustworthiness, and it's around credibility, it's around reliability, and it's around intimacy, knowing your colleagues, over self-orientation, knowing the organization inside out. So well worth having a dig into these reports and checking out davidmeister.com on this as well, because I think there's some really interesting insights. There's two more topics to get through, and I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to skip to a really important topic around artificial intelligence. Look, I've had two types of conversations around AI. A group of kind of peers that I speak to kind of go, do you know what, it's not affecting me. I'm not using it. Security won't let me. So I kind of don't care about it. It's not impacting me right now. And then another group of AI, AI early adopters who have kind of gone, I'm using it. I love it. It's great for my productivity. I don't get writer's block anymore. That's not a thing. And I think what was really interesting was a bit of research that we have here, just skipping through. You can see the link on the right-hand side, but how are people using AI within internal communications? No surprise that actually content generation is the leader here with 18%, but really close behind is executive summaries. And I think when we look at things like Copilot coming on board, something that's able to really quickly digest an hour-long town hall briefing and just squeeze out, a 200-word summary or something even much more concise. For productivity, that's going to be a game changer, especially if you weren't at the session or weren't able to watch the session live and in the moment, or even if you didn't plan it. Key issues, 14% came in as a really common use case. But we covered this in our October webinar. And I think one of the stats was that 50% of the audience said that they'd been using AI for employee comms already. So half the people that joined that session were already using it. 48% hadn't, and 2% were kind of unsure. And then 89% of attendees said that in the next 12 months, they saw AI as something that would create value, especially when it comes to generating comms as well. So how am I using it? I mentioned kind of early on in the intro that yes, I work here. I do work at Poppulo, but my job is to do internal communications at Poppulo, which is great because I don't have to fight for a channels budget anymore. I just get to use the tools. I work really closely with our product and engineering teams to try stuff first, give them honest feedback about what works, how I think it should be implemented, what might be missing. And what I've seen through our own use of Poppulo AI, which we launched this year, is we have something built into our system now that allows us, me in particular, to really save time. So that productivity point I made is something I'm benefiting from. The tools are also helping when it comes to there's lots of vendors working on this space, as you can imagine, but building in productivity points around existing workflows as well. So lots of information on Poppulo AI in the bottom left-hand side there. You can re-watch the webinar, which helped us launch this as well. And again, I'm using it, and something I find it particularly useful for is when I'm doing push notifications using our feeds functionality, is trying to get a really concise, just 40-word push notification for mobile apps. Sometimes it's pretty tricky, but again, you're able to save a bunch of time and edits and re-edits and shifting stuff down just by using generative AI, which is fantastic. Let's talk about there we go. Sorry about this, guys. It's going very slow. I've just seen some interesting comments there. So Joe, before I move on to the Poppulo maturity model, and then I will sort of help us summarize here. Looking at the AI, I'm not interested in using AI technology from SaaS vendor. What I want is API hooks so we can use our own AI tools with your software. For example, if I host a GPT-4 instance in Azure and train it on our corporate tone of voice, then I want to be able to use that in your model. That's, yeah, absolutely, Jay. I completely agree. Again, I'm a customer myself. I think that's really great feedback. I think it's important for all software vendors to look at how customers are using AI themselves and then working out what the product roadmap needs to be over the next 6, 12, 24 months, because as we've seen, this is moving tremendously fast. Let's talk about the maturity model really quickly then. Human behaviors and decision making. We had Lindsay from Scarlett Abbott join us for this, who is an expert, absolutely fantastic at what she does. And we looked at psychological factors that impact internal communications and human behavior and decision making. And the maturity model, I won't read everything out to you here, and I have got a link to this on the next slide as well. So fear not, we will be sharing the slides again as well, just to remind you. But the maturity model covers 7 pillars: outcomes, personas, personalization, communicators, channels, branding, analytics. And then there's some results that we shared on the back of this as well. So let me just move us on to that slide, because I think this is really interesting. Maturity model link in the top right-hand side, everyone. 44% of communicators are not aligned to business outcomes. One of my old bosses would kind of balk at that. I think his focus and something he drummed into me and the rest of the people he's worked with in his career was awareness isn't an outcome. Therefore, everything we do as communicators needs to drive some kind of outcome. So to see that kind of number is, I don't think it's hugely surprising, but it is something that I think, we'd all be concerned about. We're all in the business of changing behaviours and driving business outcomes after all. 46% of the respondents don't know who their communicator is, don't know who to work with in the organisation. And then 7% of colleagues, 7% of respondents using data to determine whether comms are working. So we can see there, when it comes to the maturity side of things, there's work to be done. And again, check out the report there in the top right as well. So I'm going to quickly grab a drink of water because we're nearing time. There was a lot of information there, and again, I'm sharing what lots of fantastic experts have shared. So what I would say is, get the slides, check out the reports. There's so much rich data in there. There's so many great ideas. But while I grab a quick drink of water, Suze, let me hand back to you, and then I'm going to wrap up talking about 2024.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. That was a lot to cover, but we really did get to talk about a lot of great topics and trends and challenges and solutions over this last year. So before we go on to 2024 trends and topics, just want to throw out a quick poll. If any of what Andrew discussed today really resonated with you and you want to dig in a little more and see how Poppulo's platform can help improve your comms in the new year, we'd love to connect you with our team. So if you're interested, yes. If you're not, no, it's fine too. We're just gonna leave that on for about 10 more seconds or so.
Thanks, Suze.
Yep, no problem.
And thank you everyone for your comments. There's been some, it's been a really good, I'm going to go back and look at this because there's a whole great conversation that's gone on around kind of, getting to know your audience, measurement, how that's worked, and a few other questions as well. Thanks, Hannah, for your comment. Will Day says the trend for in-house Gen AI platforms is definitely growing. Being able to integrate tools such as Poppulo into this would be really useful. Yep, good point, Will. And yeah, I think that poll's closed now. So let me just wrap up then by transitioning to asking for feedback. Again, I'd love for you guys to do this in the chat if possible. What we want to know is, what do you think the trends are going to be for 2024? What are the things that are going to be impacting your priority list? Is it still change and transformation? Is it leadership comms? Is it M&A? Is it something else? So that's the first question. And then the final thing I'd love to hear from people here is, what topics do you want to see us cover in webinars so that whoever's doing this job next year and wrapping up is covering topics that are really useful to you guys. So please do share that in the chat while you can. Just while I give you guys a second to do that, because I appreciate we've only got about 120 seconds left. I'm just going to have a little look in the chat to see if any questions have come across. Here we go. Lars, great question. How do we view the understanding of the informal networks within the organization in boosting internal communication and engagement, and in gaining deeper understanding of your real organization, particularly through methods like organizational network analysis? I think it's a really good question, Lars, and I'd love to have a coffee with you and learn more about that, because that looks, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to try and answer it. I'm showing vulnerability and letting you know that I don't have all the answers right now. But I'd love to know more about that. Lars, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's connect. Hannah agrees. She says, very good question. Good stuff. Role of DEIB has come up on the as a topic. The role of DEIB in comms, how to navigate changing social norms. I think this is really important. Something that I've always struggled with, I think, is how we can do DEIB justice without turning our channels into essentially kind of, I think there are 260 awareness days now. So, working out what is a priority for the business, what's actually going to help people, making sure we're not triggering people, and how to do that. But yeah, absolutely, that's a big one for next year. Building organizational leadership, risk tolerance to transparent listening, Q&As. Yes, that's a really good one. Really good topic. AI policy for internal communications, restructuring agency to focus on internal comms only. What tools do we need to invest in? Sustainability comms, absolutely, hugely important. That's not going anywhere. And how we embed that internally and make it, yeah, that's a really good one. So organization I was at before Poppulo, actually, Joanna, we were talking about ESG, and we had like a podcast, and no one was listening to the podcast because it's called ESG, and we need to find a way, using all the good things that we do as communicators, to tell the story, right? Use storytelling, bring it to life for people. Dell Smith, intranet implementation, absolutely. Let's connect on that, Dell, as well. If you'd like to connect on LinkedIn, I've got some fun stories on that. Same with yourself, Louise. Hannah's created a company Gen AI policy, and it's become so quickly outdated. Yeah, I guess that's not a surprise, right? But I think that's a really interesting point. Guys, so many trends and topics there. We're going to digest this, because there are so many, so many interesting points, and we'll look to bring as much of that to life as possible, because, as you know, being a communicator, a huge part of it anyway is to seek feedback. So we'll look to implement these. Look out for more invites for our webinars on our LinkedIn and elsewhere. And I think it would be fantastic to to see some of this stuff come to life next year. Thank you all so much for joining me. Really looking forward to catching up with as many of you as possible on LinkedIn, and I'll just hand over to Suze just to wrap up. Thank you so much, guys, for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. Love seeing all the chatter in the chat function. If you want to connect with Andrew, like you said, connect with him on LinkedIn. And that will wrap up our final webinar of 2023. And we're excited to jump into 2024 soon. So see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.